Hello and welcome to GTD and Remote Work, a dialogue with Brian Robertson, who is here with me. Brian, you have been a GTD practitioner for as long as I have known you and even longer. And to kind of kick us off, knowing that this is really a dialogue and we'll take questions, I want to let people get to know you for a moment. Could you give us your walnut origin story as it pertains to GTD? Like what, I've heard you refer to GTD as your spiritual practice, but take me back to pre-GTD.
Yeah, well, so I found GTD when I was a pretty new CEO. This was, oh man, it was, must have been somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago. This been probably closer to 20. I was building my software company. It was my first sizable, significant business endeavor. And I was just getting overwhelmed. I mean, I was building a company, but I was still doing a lot of the work of the company. I was growing the company. I was managing it. We had multiple clients. We had a lot of ambitions. I certainly did. And I took on a massive amount of work, which was nothing unusual for me. Even before that, I loved burying myself in lots and lots of creative projects.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a whole new level. That it wasn't just one project in depth. It was just so many different areas I touched, so many different roles now in my Holacracy language I might use. Even before Holacracy though, I wore so many hats, I had so much work, and it was starting to really wear on me. It was getting overwhelming. And so I started trying to find some way to keep it all organized. And like, I think everyone before they find GTD, I had some way and it made it work. I had some lists. I had a simple system I kind of cobbled together that worked well enough.
Mm-hmm.
I was still finding myself overwhelmed, stressed, and not moving forward as gracefully as I wanted on all my projects. I found myself, in David Allen's words, chasing the latest and loudest entirely too often, not centered and not focused, not 100% clear that I was doing exactly the right thing right now. Right. So, I was looking for a solution, and I did some research. This was really, really early days. So I'd say I Googled it, but I don't even know if Google was around yet at this point. Maybe it was somewhere in that era. And anyway, somehow, I have no idea how, I ran into the book Getting Things Done, right? Which is the root of GTD, or,
Mm-hmm.
And the book name is now the name of the method. Interesting, David Allen, the author and the creator of the method, he never intended it to be called GTD.
Oh, really? It was just the name of the book?
It was just Getting Things Done. And
That's funny.
People kept shortening it to GTD, so it kind of stuck.
It's just the acronym rolls off the tongue well.
It does, yeah. So for me, though, I mean, I thought I was, reasonably organized before, and I was, but when I read that book, it helped me see an entire new level that was possible. It helped me see all the ways in which I was to use a meditation term, monkey mind, right? Just chasing whatever was bouncing around in my head, and like, oh wait, I got to do this, and oh whoa, don't forget that, and I was staying later and later at the office just because I would not go home because I would have another thing pop in my head, and it was stressful, and it was actually less stressful for me to just stay later and deal with the thing than worry about it being bouncing around my head all night, and so I would just work and work and work just to try to get stuff out of my head. And then that book really changed my life. Reading that was like, oh my God, here's how I can completely stay. It's not just about staying organized. And I think you were hitting at this in your question, right? This, to me, it wasn't just a way of getting more organized.
Right, because a lot of professionals consider themselves, the natural question is, but I'm a really organized person. I have a to-do list.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and for me, this was a way of, it was reducing the stress. It wasn't just about getting more organized or more productive. It was, even as organized as I was, it was doing it differently and in a way that let me let go of all of those things bouncing around my head, and not have constantly my mind hijacked, by whatever it was that I needed to get done or hadn't thought of or was holding somewhere in my head. So I ended up feeling like the stress relief of it was even more profound for me than than the actual productivity boost, although it was that too.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it was, the tagline David uses sometimes in his work is stress-free productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really key. It's not just productivity. It, for me, brought about stress-free productivity. And then, well, I don't, do you want to get into now some of the, you called it my spiritual practice, which you refer to it as.
You brought us to the present, which is great.
Yeah.
That's where we want to be. And what I would really love to have you kind of move to as a thread from this, we are under stress. It is a time where whatever was stressing us, even for those who would consider themselves the most organized. I've heard from people who've been following the Covey method for years, and executives who consider themselves great at stress management. All of that is so heightened. So maybe you could take us a little bit through some of the ways in which your GTD practice is, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, helping keep you sane at a time when the world is kind of crazy.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so one, this is one of the fundamental insights in the GTD method and the book that I took out of it. And if there's nothing else that anyone takes out of it, this is the thing to do. And it's separate your lists of projects and actions. And so GTD has this definition, right? As I know you know, Rebecca, but I'm going to tell you as if
by all means
listening. So GTD has this concept of project versus action, and project is defined as an outcome, right? And action is defined as a single concrete step that takes no thought work to envision what doing it looks like, right? So
I want you to repeat that, Brian.
Yeah.
The definition of an action.
Yeah. Let me start with project, which is, people often think of projects as big things, right? There's big things you work on. You only have a few. No, I have 100 projects on my list right now, or thereabouts, because a project here is defined as just an outcome that I want to achieve that takes more than one step to get there. And it can be a very small thing, right? I once had a project on my list, get a new belt, right? And it's very small for a project, but for me, that's multiple steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't be trusted, as you know, with my own fashion.
That is true.
Right. Yes. For me, there's a step in there of like, find somebody to pick out some options for me, order the belts, try them on, return the ones that don't work. Right. There's multiple steps and there's an outcome I want. And the reason I put that on my project list was because at one point I was realizing I just had a little bit of stress. I kept finding myself telling myself, I need a new belt, and it was hijacking my thoughts. I need a new belt, and so I put it on my project list, and then the stress melted away because I trust myself to use that list. And what I'll do at first is break it down into what's my actual next action, and so a next action is a single concrete step, not two steps, but a single physical act you can just do in one step, whatever you think of as a step. You sit down, you do it in a one physical step, it's done. And the other key part is, for an action, it takes no thought work to envision doing, right? It doesn't take mental processing to figure out, what does doing that look like? You can read it and know instantly what doing it looks like. And so let me use one of my stories to illustrate how easy it is to get these confused and the psychic cost and stress of getting these confused.
I'm curious which story you're going to do. I've heard some of them, and now I'm like mentally betting on which story you're going to use.
Yeah. So this was way back after I moved into my house in Pennsylvania. I custom built this house. We moved in, and I had all these boxes in my garage from the move, right? Like the garage was a mess. And so I had what I thought at the time was an action on my action list: clean my garage. Right. And
I would imagine that's on the project list of a lot of our
listeners. A lot of people, right? Yeah. And maybe, you all listening can relate to this. I would have time to get some work done around my house, and I'd look at my list, and I'd scan, I'd get to clean my garage, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of dread, right? Like I'd feel stressed. I could feel it in my body, and I wouldn't do it. I would choose anything else. Like, can I do my taxes or something? Like anything but clean my garage, right? And it got to the point, it was so bad, where I realized at one point, as I'm scanning my list of actions, my eyes would just skip over that step, right? They wouldn't even take it in, wouldn't retain it, right? It was like my mind was creating a mental block to even—
You had a block against, and we've all got that thing. We've all got a garage.
Yep, totally.
So what do you do?
What I realized at some point was the reason for that is that's not an action in that definition. I had to actually envision and process it. What would doing that actually look like? What would I do first? And I hadn't done that mental work. But because it was on my action list, my brain somewhere didn't realize that that was what I needed to do. And I would just see it and I'd feel overwhelmed because I didn't know what doing that looked like. And I didn't have the awareness that the issue was, I don't know what doing that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
What I realized was that's a project, it's an outcome. What I want is a clean garage, right? That's my outcome. So when I realized that, I moved that to my project list and I reframed it. I framed my projects to be outcomes, to be really honest with myself. What does done look like?
Mm-hmm.
Right? In this case, done looks like a clean garage. So now it's a project, a clean garage on my outcome list, my project list. And then I have to do the mental work of, well, what is my next action, right? That's David calls them next actions, your next action. I don't need to figure out every action for it. People sometimes get stuck in that level of planning. And if it's useful, do it, but often it's not, right? Really, we only need to know at least one next action and we have enough to move forward. We don't need to envision every possible action from here on.
Right. And that right there is a massive stress reduction. We're so used to an environment where in order to achieve an outcome, we need to know every single thing we need to do to get that done versus, okay, just what's the next thing? Totally. So much less stress.
And we can trust our ability to steer as we go. You know, we usually can figure out the next thing once we do the next thing.
Yep.
So, yeah. So when I did the thought work, it kind of went like this. Well, I've got all the boxes in there and I've actually already unloaded the boxes, but there's still a lot of just broken down cardboard and I can't really organize anything else until I get out the massive quantity of cardboard, but it's too much to just leave at my curb for the normal recycling service. So I needed to bring it to a recycling center. Well, I'm in a new town. I don't actually know where that is, but I'm pretty sure the town has one. And I know the town has a website and I'm pretty sure I had seen it on there. So my next action is Google town's website to find a recycling center address, right? That's my next action towards the outcome of a clean garage. And once I make that split and I get clear, that's my action towards this outcome. Now when I have time to get stuff done around the house, the psychic block's gone. Mm-hmm. It's actually the opposite. Now I look at that, I see that action, right? Google town's website to find a recycling center address. And I feel motivated. I feel
right.
inspired.
It's so easy.
Yeah, quick win. And I think the issue is what happens there is I don't need to envision what doing that looks like. So now I feel the instant drive to do. It's almost like a different energy that we're in, a different state. Mm-hmm. The work or the feeling, the energy of breaking down and envisioning what would I do is so radically different than the energy of doing, right? And so when we're in the mood to do, and we're in doing mode, and yet we have something in there that we actually have to go to this other mode of envisioning and thought work and thinking.
The how to do.
Yeah, and if we don't know that that's the issue, then it's so easy to just feel overwhelmed and not realize that it's because we need to shift modes and that's not where we are. So for me, that was, so life-changing, that simple act of separating my outcomes from my actions and recognizing what the difference is. Most people don't even hold a difference. They just fuse them into a list of things to do.
Right.
And both, and then they walk around stressed and overwhelmed, right? So for me, separating those was one of the absolute big aha moments of my professional life, really.
Yeah, that's great. And I imagine, so one thing that I'm noticing, and I want to kind of keep along this thread, particularly in terms of stress reduction and what can we do with our current situation, and maybe pivot a little bit to remote work and teams, because GTD as a practice, though it benefits organizations, is an individual practice. We have our own GTD systems, we have our own lists of projects and next actions. So can you talk a little bit about, one, maybe the benefits for a team in general, although I'm sure our audience is thinking, oh my gosh, what if everybody on my team had a separate list of actions and projects? That would be amazing. How does it benefit a team? And then also thinking in terms of when we're not physically together and we can't bounce each other ideas off each other so easily, how does it help in remote work? And maybe what are some tips you've discovered over your years of remote work that makes GTD practice between individuals easier?
Yeah. Okay, so I need to have one other piece before I go there of the puzzle.
Go for it.
And I have an answer to your question. So the one other piece is another way in which GTD really changed my life. The other major piece I took out of it, aside from that difference, was to notice my attention more. And this is when I say, I'd say I'm half joking, but it's barely a joke at all. When I say GTD is my spiritual practice, for me, it's very much it's like a meditative practice of noticing what's on my mind, what's caught my attention. So the other major insight I got from it, and this is actually going to connect directly to remote work. The other major insight was notice when something grabs my attention, grabs my mind, right? Whether it's internal, like an idea just pops, or whether I'm sitting here talking to you and somewhere in the back of my head is, oh shit, I got to go remember to pick up that thing from the store, or oh, I got to send that email before I leave town today, or whatever's popping into my head, noticing those things, right? The things that catch your attention. There's a great quote from David: if you don't pay attention to what's got your attention, it'll take more of your attention than it deserves.
He's got the best witty witticisms.
He does.
David is great for that.
Totally. So, I love that. And that for me was almost like my first, I was a pretty young professional at the time. This was my first like really deep dive into something that is kind of like a meditation practice here, right? It changed my world to start noticing, just really subtly noticing, when am I distracted, even a little? When am I sitting in a meeting and something pops into my head that pulls me off? It stops my presence. And I believe that presence is one of the greatest gifts we can offer to each other and to our work, to do our purpose in the world. I think our presence is our consciousness, being able to put our presence where we choose to, intentionally and consciously, is such a gift for ourselves and for others. And this is my practice for noticing what's stopping that, right? Because if you want to have complete presence and in the moment awareness, you could just go live in a cave. You could do the renouncing the world.
Which some people are doing.
Yep, that's fine. You can go live in a monastery. And that's part of the benefits that people have of meditation retreats and things like that. They remove so much of the world's distractions that it's pretty easy to stay completely present in the moment. But what I want is, how do I do that when I'm in a world where my phone's ringing, I have texts coming in, I have emails flying in, I have people knocking on my door, I'm doing 1,000,001 things. How do I be in that world and still stay with that absolute present in the moment clarity, awareness, and to me, the answer is notice what's pulling me away from that, and then getting it organized in a way that I trust it will show up in my mind right when it needs to and not before, right? So a simple example of that is, if anyone's ever tried a grocery list, using that and really gotten in the habit, imagine without a grocery list, you realize you need something and it is distracting. You might be sitting in a meeting and then remember, oh, I got to go remember to buy cat food on the way home, right? Or whatever. And then worse, on the way home, you have some other groceries you need, you stop, you get a bunch of things, you totally forget the cat food until you get home and you see the cat. And that's when your mind reminds you, yep, oh wait, I need cat food, right?
Yep.
And this is the thing, another quote of David's: the mind is for having ideas, not holding them. When you store that kind of idea in your head, when you store that thing of I need cat food, your mind doesn't remind you right when it needs to usually. It reminds you at all the wrong times. It reminds you when you're in a meeting, when you get home and see the cat, right? All that is distracting you from being fully present. It's taking some processing power away, right? Even when you're not consciously aware of it, somewhere in the back of your mind, it's holding on to all these things. It's worried you're going to forget. But as soon as you get in the habit of using a grocery list and you put it on that list, now your mind can let go of it. Because as long as you're in the habit of using it, when you're in the right place, you'll pull that list out and there it is, and you don't need to hold on to it. Right? Or another example that I think everyone has experienced, your calendar. Right? Imagine trying to live life as a professional today without a calendar. Right?
I guess we have a webinar. It's sometime.
Right. Yeah. Imagine how stressful this would have been. You and I both needed to be here at 10 a.m. my time, whatever. And then I imagine the stress, if I didn't have a calendar, I would be waking up at night. I don't think I would have slept well last night. I would have kept thinking, wait, I got to remember, I've got this webinar to be on. It'd be incredibly stressful. And it would be, my mind would be reminding me of it. Massive mental chatter constantly about every one of my things I care about, that are on my calendar. And yet we have a calendar so we don't experience that. But I think most professionals are doing the same damn thing for everything that doesn't fit on a calendar, right?
Right.
so many people aren't in the habit of capturing commitments to themselves, like to be here at 10 a.m., that are not time-based. Commitments like, I got to remember to send that email to a colleague, or I need to print the boarding pass for my flight, or whatever, right? So we hold on to these in our heads instead of having them outside in an external brain, like a calendar, where we don't have to actually think about them. So anyway, getting back to remote work, this for me was huge. And to start paying attention to what pops in my head. And instead of just ignoring it, I capture it, I process, what does this mean to me? And I get it in lists. Now, before I had that, I at least had an in-person office, right? At the time, before I got this practice down, I was in an office. And that almost gave me a crutch, because if I didn't have all this stuff well organized, and my mind is not very reliable, none of our minds are for this, at least I had someone knocking on my door to remind me, or walking by the hall. I had this experience often. I would leave the door to my office open, partly because I wanted to see somebody walking by, because I would often remember, oh, wait, Rebecca, come in. I got something to talk to you about. Right?
Or it looks like everyone's heading to the conference room.
Right.
I have a meeting.
Yeah, totally. Or somebody would remind me, they'd come in and say, hey, I'm waiting on you for that thing. And I'd be like, right, okay, let me do that now. And so what I was doing was chasing the latest and loudest, the latest thing to show up, knock on my door, latest person, or the loudest to be screaming either in my head or actually, pushing
screaming
me.
At you.
Yeah. And I was using all those cues of an office to make it easier. At least chasing the latest and loudest, I was still getting stuff done. It was not stress-free, but it was productive, right? And I think a lot of people have that. They have the productivity boost of being in an office. And even if they're not trusting their own system, they can't trust their own system, they can at least trust that their colleagues are there. They'll see them, they'll remember, they'll be walking by, or they'll be talking to someone about something else and it'll pop up in the conversation. I think being alive together gives us a crutch. I don't think it's a good crutch. It's an incredibly stressful way to live, to be chasing the latest and loudest instead of confidently working on the absolute most important thing without any doubt that that's where you should focus.
And it sounds like it's a massive distraction to that presence that you now find giving you so much peace and so useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Massive distraction. Yeah. So, in in-person environments, we at least have more ability to chase the latest and loudest. And not that that's a good thing, but it works. And then we go to a remote environment. You don't have the same cues. You don't have the person walking by your door. You don't have as many conversations likely, right? There's just something about the tax of talking on Zoom. I find when I do talk on Zoom, it's less likely to meander and it's more likely to be pretty on point to whatever the talk's about, which means it's less likely to get into all the things that I need to remember, There's less chance of bumping into people, less chance of them. It takes more effort to reach out to someone than it does to just walk by them and say something. So suddenly, I think a lot of the cues are gone. And if you don't have a really good way of organizing yourself, it's a little disorienting. You're in a world now where it's harder to chase the latest and loudest. Almost highlights more, though, what are you working on? Are you really working on the most important thing in your world? And let me use another metaphor for those who don't have a good GTD practice or equivalent. You've still probably tasted the kind of clarity and the kind of presence that comes when you're absolutely sure, beyond a doubt, that you are focused on the most important thing, regardless of what else is on your plate. And that's probably when you have a massive crisis, right? Like imagine, you get a phone call and your kid's in the hospital or something, and you drop all the projects. You don't worry about anything else. You know exactly the most important thing in your world. Right? And you go there and you focus on it and you do it with peace, even as projects are falling all over the ground around you, because right now, this is exactly where you need to be, right? I want that experience all the time, not just when there's a crisis.
Right, without the crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Not just in a crisis, and that comes from having complete confidence that of everything in your world, including all the stuff you're dropping, you're working on the absolute most important thing. And you can't know that unless you have a complete inventory of here's everything you could be working on, right? You have a complete list. If there's things bouncing around your head, you're going to always be worried what thing you're not thinking about. Right? But if you have a list, which I do, I can pull up my list. I have every outcome in my entire world I care about is on my list. And every next action to get me towards all of those outcomes are all on my list. So I can look at that list and I can know, here's where I need to be focused. This one feels most important, right? And I'm pretty damn confident where I'm focusing on my time, even as I'm dropping other things. There's another quote from David. There's a difference between feeling overwhelmed and being overwhelmed. And they're independent. right? I can actually be overwhelmed. There's more to do than I can possibly get done. And I can feel centered, present, confident, and not at all worried about not getting everything done because I know I'm working on the most important stuff. But more often, we have people doing the exact opposite. They feel overwhelmed all day, and somehow at the end of their day, they actually have gotten everything done. They're not actually overwhelmed. They did have enough time to do everything important. But they felt overwhelmed all day because they didn't feel confident and clear that they were working on the most important stuff, right? Until everything was done. This was me before this. I'd go home at the end of the day and I'd realize I got everything I needed to done, but I felt overwhelmed all day.
Right.
And I
Or
think
even worse, I was going to say even worse are the days where you're feeling overwhelmed. You know that you haven't accomplished everything you wanted to, and it follows you home. And now because we're working at home, there's no distinction.
Yeah.
That it just it's following you around the house. You try to separate out in your evenings, and you still feel overwhelmed because you know you need to start again. And that distinction between life and work just skews.
You know, I love that. I hadn't even considered that, Rebecca. And that's triggering all sorts of thoughts. Yeah, I think that is one of the techniques that people that with a traditional office have. Even if they don't have that level of clarity and organization, they can at least compartmentalize and know when I go home, I'm going to just focus on my home stuff.
Right.
Leave all this behind. And that manages the stress. But we've lost that now. People.
Right.
On the other side, though, when you get a really good practice like GTD in place, it doesn't matter anymore. In fact, for me, I'm leaving right after this call. I'm flying to Key Largo for a weekend of scuba diving, and it's really when I scuba dive a lot, and what I love doing on dive trips is I'll spend a few hours every day working, right? And I'll scuba dive, and between dives I'll work some more, and I'll scuba dive, and I find that really easy because I can load up my work context. I can know I'm working on one thing that's most important, and then I can set it all down and know that right now the most important thing I can do is be diving with those pretty fish, right? And I can do that partly because I don't have the overwhelm, right, of all the work. And so I think when you get a good practice, not only do you not need the segregation of work and personal life, you can actually blend them really effectively. And I actually love doing that. I feel great doing that. I have a great time working for a few hours a day, and then I scuba dive and I intersperse them. And it's my preferred way of working. It's amazing. You know, I don't need the separation. I don't need the artificial like divide just to manage the stress. And right now, people don't have the ability to have at least the physical divide of an office, and we have more distractions. Especially if you're, I've been trapped in my house, not trapped, but you know, with a 7-year-old for the past many months now, and that can be a little distracting at times. Right?
Yep. Something I'm sure a lot of our attendees can relate to, of especially our teacher who is trying to keep other people's children occupied remotely, while their parents are likely trying to do remote work.
Totally. Yeah. So, you know, it's especially with the level of distractions, I think it's even more important to have a really good practice for keeping clear what's most important.
I want to ask you to comment on, I would love to think, you know, you and I exist in a world where in most cases, when we feel like working, we can work. And when we feel like swimming with pretty fish, we can swim with pretty fish. But the reality is many people exist in a paradigm where whether you are in the office physically or you are on Zoom and available for chat, it's within certain hours. Maybe a couple of tips and tricks, and I can offer one as well that I offer frequently for maintaining, using GTD to kind of maintain some stability or some practices you have. I use the idea of commute time. One thing that people have lost in the movement between office and home is that decompression and preparation time. You know, you have your morning ritual, you get your coffee together, you get in the car and you drive or you take the train, and that's your time to think about all the things, whether or not you have a GTD practice, to kind of get your game face on for the day. And then at the end of the day, your commute back is your decompression time. I've noticed that a lot of people I talk to, including myself, are finding success in creating that preparation and decompression time, either with physical movement, going out for a walk, or clear movement from one part of the house to the other, and making that, creating a commute time. So things like that. Have you found anything that's useful, or any recommendations you might make for practices when you are constrained of when you need to be at work?
Totally. So what I do when I'm starting a working block on a typical day is I start with my tea. I've made tea a ritual for me, and it really, like, I love the power of rituals like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know, I'll sit down with my cup of tea, and the first thing I do most days, your cup beats mine.
Yes, but if I remember correctly, yours keeps your tea warm.
It does. It's a warming mug. I love this thing. So what I do first is I look at my GTD list of actions and projects, and I do that even if I kind of have a sense of what my most important thing is already. There's something powerful about just pulling it up, start of my day, getting a big picture overview, right? What are the outcomes right now on my plate? And it's just a quick scan, and what are the actions? And that starts giving me a sense of, you know, what feels most alive for me today? What feels most important? Where do I have most of my energy going? You know, and I look at my calendar. So I kind of start like that. And I love how that keeps me in touch with the big picture of even the actions I'm not doing, I look at. And at least then I'm aware of everything I'm dropping. And that gives me more confidence of the ones I am choosing, the ones I am, you know. And then I love the ritual too of checking them off. You know, it's really simple,
there's nothing more satisfying than I done this. This is done.
Yep. And it's another reason I love separating projects and actions too, because checking off my actions feels good. Those are little quick wins. I love doing that. Sometimes I'll type in an action that I just already did that wasn't in my system.
So you can check
it off. Check it off. Yeah. But then when I get to check off an outcome, it's like a drug. I swear. There's something, you know, because those are now, they're bigger and I don't check them off every day. And so there's like a sense of celebration when I do. And I actually add then another ritual is I do something to celebrate when I check off a project, right? Even a relatively small outcome is still multiple steps, and it's something big that is no longer open in my world, right? And sometimes the celebration is I go down and I go in my hot tub or whatever, you know, I just take a break. Or sometimes I just literally walk around the house looking for something to do for 15 minutes and then come back.
Right. It's almost like you're giving yourself permission to be completely distracted by whatever comes up.
Yeah, it's like I just finished that. I'm going to celebrate by doing anything that my energy pulls me towards for the next, 20 minutes or whatever. So yeah, and I love that. I love that hit. And that also punctuates the checking off a project, which also keeps my motivation up for the next one, which I find it's, for me, I've worked at home way before COVID, right? We haven't had an office for, over 10 years now. And, but somehow still I find it harder to manage my motivation in this COVID world. And I don't know what it is, if it's just noticing the stress of the world around me and all the stuff going on and, Facebook.
All the changes, all of the things that, it used to be something as simple as your example of you need to go buy cat food.
Yep.
It's just now starting that if you need cat food, you can go to the store. Now it's the stress of, okay, who carries the cat food that I need? Do they have curbside pickup? Do they have it in stock? Do I need to call?
Totally.
You can't just get in a car and go to a store. Do I have a mask? Is it clean?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so somehow like the stress level's higher and it seems even more important now. And the motivation too, it's harder to keep myself motivated. So any of these little tricks that help my motivation stay up really make a difference right now. A significant difference. And
definitely.
Yeah. And I'm still looking, I don't have all the answers, but I am grateful that at least I have the basics.
Right. We were more fortunate than some to already have this dynamic in place with our remote work.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you. I want to get your thoughts. I want to talk about trust.
Yeah.
Because when we were in an office, if you and I are sitting, we have our partner retreats. And if I'm curious about what you're doing when we are physically in person, I walk over, Brian, what you working on? Or I can see you in a meeting with several other people. In an in-office environment, we have a better sense just by virtue of interaction and noticing in our physical senses of what each other is working on.
Yeah.
In a remote environment, we may go days without interacting with some of our colleagues that we're used to talking to multiple times a day.
Yep.
So it's the trust piece of, gosh, I hope I'm working on the right thing. I hope my team's working on the right thing. I want to ask you to maybe comment on your experience with GTD and teams and trust as a organization.
Yeah, so transparency, I think, is key. There's something ironic about trust. The more an environment requires trust, the less trust you end up with, right? If you have to trust somebody, it's scary. And that actually tends to decrease trust. The more you don't have to trust anyone, you know all the data you need, you know you have the ability to get your job and your needs met, and you don't have to trust anyone, that makes it far easier to actually trust people, right? So if you want an environment with high trust, you need to find everything that requires trust and find a way to make it not require trust. That's one of my key learnings over many, many years now. And that's also built into Holacracy, right? And GTD is a foundational cornerstone of that, right? So when everyone's doing GTD, I can trust everyone has their actions and their projects separated. They're tracking them. They're not just bouncing around someone's head. In our company and many others, we use GlassFrog, our Holacracy tool, which syncs to all of our GTD tools. So I use OmniFocus for my own GTD, my own projects and actions.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That was in the question of what tool do you use?
I use OmniFocus and I love it. And it syncs 2 ways with GlassFrog. And I know Rebecca uses OmniFocus, a lot of our team does. And they all sync into GlassFrog. So I can go into GlassFrog and I can see my entire team's projects, right? They're all in there. And they stay up to date even as my team does things on their own and changes things. They're all up to date in there. So I have total transparency of what are the outcomes that all my team members are working on, right? And that transparency means I don't have to trust them as much, right? Which makes it much easier for me to trust them. Likewise, we have built into Holacracy some basic expectations. Like I can go to anyone and say, hey, give me an estimate of when you think that project will get done, and I can get the data. Or what's your next action towards this project, and I can get the data. Or what's your relative priority of these projects, and I can get that. And that expectation in our company, there's a cultural thing that's normal. I'm not in a lot of company cultures in conventional companies today, there's a sense of, asking somebody, hey, what's your next step with that? Or, what's the update on that project is almost communicating distrust,
right?
And nagging them or something. And that's a cultural thing that needs to change. If you want a high trust, dynamic environment, you need it to be totally normal and not an insult at all, to be all over somebody with what's next for that, what's the projection, what's on your plate, what's your priorities, right? When that is normalized as, that's not me not trusting you, that's me getting the information I need so that I can prioritize my own work or I can follow up on something. That's me taking responsibility for my world instead of just putting all responsibility on yours. Right? The problem with trust is it often comes with when we go to, I'm just going to trust you, that often means I'm going to give up my personal responsibility and put 100% responsibility on the thing I'm waiting on for you. Instead of actually owning, no, if this is something I care about, I'm going to retain responsibility even as you also have it. I don't want me having 0 responsibility and you having 100 for the thing that I need from you. I want to still retain 100% responsibility. And ideally, I also want you to take 100% responsibility.
Right.
We have 200% here, right?
It's much more likely that the thing is going to actually get done.
Happen. And for me to take 100% responsibility, I have to be free to get involved and say, what's on your plate? When do you think you're going to have that done? What's the priority? What's next for that for you? I need to be able to dig in without it being an insult to you so that I can take responsibility, right? So that cultural shift is critical. And for that to work, you have to have GTD, because if you don't, and I'm going to you and I'm starting to ask these things, it is creating pressure because you're just chasing the latest and loudest thing. And if I start hitting you with all these requests and all these questions, suddenly there's a lot louder in your universe. When
right. And it may not be the most important thing.
It may not be.
Just be the loudest. And
yeah,
if I'm responding to it because I want to be a good teammate or be a good player, the best way I can be a good teammate is to take in your information and requests, park them if I need to, and continue to work on the most important thing.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, totally. It's empowering to be able to say to someone, yeah, I'm not going to get that done in the time frame you want it. It's not my most important thing. And I'm completely clear on that. And if you want to talk about my priorities, I can show you what I think is more important. And you're welcome to try to convince me that I'm wrong. I'll listen. And I might not be convinced, right? And there's something so empowering about that. And it's not personal, and I'm not being a bad team member, right? I'm in fact being a really, really empowered, good leader of my piece. And I'm being transparent so that you can get the information you need from me. And then if we have a conflict of priorities, we have another process we can sort that out with, right? And Holacracy gives you that, so we have another way. So Holacracy is in many ways a layer on top of GTD, right? GTD is more foundational. Holacracy is layered on top of it to deal with the intersection of different people. GTD is very much an individual practice. Holacracy then connects when you need to connect to different people. But all of it really is, ironically, creating a really high trust environment by reducing the need to rely on trust.
Right, by increasing transparency so that you don't have to rely on trust.
Yeah.
One kind
and
of
normalizing, increasing transparency and normalizing the ownership that involves digging into somebody else's world and lists.
Yep. One thing I've also noticed, a byproduct as it will be for this ability to dig in, particularly in a time when we are physically distant from each other, sometimes being able to ask for help is harder. Yeah. So in those conversations of what's on your plate, what's the most important? Okay, let's say you and I, Brian, we disagree about what the highest priority is, and you try and pitch me, I still disagree. I actually explain to you, here are the things that are more important. But if you now have the ability to say, okay, well, I still really want my thing done. What can where does the negotiation, where can we go from here? How can I help you to help me? It opens opportunities to help each other as teammates in a really beautiful and clear way to get everyone's needs met. So,
absolutely.
Any thoughts on?
Yeah, well, I love that point. It's like when you have that kind of culture where it's not an insult to like dig in and poke someone and ask for their things, and no one takes that personally. When you have that culture and you can do that and you get the answer back that, no, this thing's not my highest priority, it's going to take weeks or whatever, and I need it sooner, that does free me to dig in and say, how can I help you? Is there something I could take on your plate that would allow you to do this sooner? What's your highest priority? Can I help you make that happen faster? Or it lets me get creative, right? Another thing I often say about this, in most companies today, we have what I call a hope and blame culture.
I love this. Define hope and blame culture. It's one of my favorite things.
It's where we ask for what we need from someone. We say, hey, can you get this done? Often this goes with a commitment to a deadline. I say, can you get this done for me by next Friday? Right? And you say yes in a typical culture.
Because I'm a good teammate. Yeah.
You're a good teammate. You are now not prioritizing the most important thing. You're chasing what I needed and your commitment. You want to look good. So you're going to chase that commitment to look good, which ironically might actually hurt the company because you might be helping me get my need met, but at the expense of saying no to something that's actually more important for the overall organization, but nobody actually chased you down and asked for a deadline to, right? So anyway, that's one problem. The next problem is what happens typically then is I go away and I hope that you're going to hit that commitment to me and get it done. So I give you 100% responsibility. I take 0, right? I'm hoping, but I am fully prepared to blame you for missing it if you do, right? So yep. I hope. And if you miss something, then I am going to fully blame you for it. And somewhere, you know that. Even if we have a good rapport and a good relationship and you're going to try to hit it, you are at some level in your psyche scared of being blamed and you want to look good, right? So now you start managing your image, which is it's like a second job a lot of people have in most companies.
Totally.
You manage your image. Right?
And right now we can barely manage to get dressed and put on makeup. Well, most of us are probably wearing pajama bottoms. So trying to manage our image is even harder right now.
Yeah, totally. And on top of that, not only are you managing your image, there's a fear motivation under that, right? You're afraid of not looking good, of being blamed, of being judged, and maybe unfairly because you were trying and there's other factors and all that. So hope and blame. Whereas on the other hand, when you can't do that, when you have a culture that says, no, we're going to have total transparency and you can't shift responsibility like that. If I care about something, I need to own the deadline as much as get you to, right? I need to check in with you, get updates. You're not going to prioritize just because I need something by next Friday. You're going to prioritize the most important thing on your plate. And you're going to be transparent with me about your priorities. And if I want to know what else is coming before, I can ask. If I want to know what changes in the next 3 days, I can ask you in 3 days, what's changed? Where is this now? that way I have to share responsibility. And there's a great quote from Barry Oshry, who's an author who writes some about this and other organizational dynamics. And he says, it basically is some of my language in here too. If you don't have the hope and blame, if you can't just chase that, your only other option is to get involved early as a partner, not late as a judge, right? And I love that when everyone has GTD practice and you have transparency and you have Holacracy's stance on how it shifts how you give commitments, which it does, right? You're not going to just give date-based commitments the same way if you're doing Holacracy. Then it creates a culture where you really do need to get involved early as a partner, not late as a judge. And that changes the entire hope and blame culture at play. And it invites more teamwork, more collaboration, more help, more support, right? It invites us to work together to hit the overall needs, or to see when our need is actually not the most important thing for the overall team, right? Which is a good thing to really face consciously. There's just so much, and all of this is built on the foundation of good individual practice. If you don't have awareness of your own projects and actions, none of this works as it should.
Well, and mentioning, kind of going back to that crutch that you mentioned of being in the office, rather than waiting for external cues to trigger you for things, if you are consistently practicing GTD, if you have your projects and next actions, if you're digging into what other people need, these are all opportunities for interaction throughout the day, which many of us are craving if we're new to remote work. So rather than just waiting for, I'll see everybody at the Wednesday meeting. We have a meeting every Wednesday and I'll just wait for that. Now there's so many more opportunities for small, normalized, neutral transactions of, hey, Brian, just checking in. Can I get some feedback from you? You said you'd get it to me. Can I get a projection? Yeah. It's almost like offering opportunities for touch points in a time where they are so limited.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And it's also, it's so isolating, right? When you're used to being face-to-face in an office, and suddenly you're at home, and it's already isolating enough when you don't have the kind of, when you're used to chasing the latest and loudest, and then suddenly, that's even harder. And I've heard from so many people now that they're just kind of disoriented. It's maybe even a better word, disoriented and isolated.
Yep.
And you don't need that with a good practice like this. You can have clarity of what you're working on. When you need to touch in with others. There's more collaboration, right? That's the irony of having this kind of good individual practice and high individual autonomy also creates higher team collaboration. And it's one of the misunderstandings we get all the time about Holacracy, that because there is so much more individual autonomy in Holacracy, people assume that lowers the sense of team, and that's dead wrong in my experience.
It's the exact opposite.
It's the exact opposite. When you can be really autonomous and really focused, and your work, and you're clear, and you have your authority, and all of that is clear, it's so much easier to collaborate with others. And you don't have to worry about getting stuck in consensus building and painful meetings. It's just so much easier to just reach out to somebody and collaborate on something. So anyway, I think today more than ever, when you don't have the crutch of face-to-face work, it's even more important to have good practices, Holacracy, GTD, whatever, good practices to facilitate individual self-management, right? Even before team self-management, individual self-management, and then, team from there.
I love it. I love it. And the opportunities created, they're not going to go away just because none of the benefits that can be achieved in any of this work will end when hopefully we can all be in each other's physical presence again. It's just going to be easier, which is kind of nice. Yeah. There were a couple questions, and really I just want to touch on this one. It always happens, and Brian, you mentioned OmniFocus is the tool both of us use. What other tools and resources are out there other than OmniFocus? I would almost, unless you've got another suggestion, I would say Google GTD tools. There are so many.
Yeah, there really are.
Yeah. So any last thoughts? If you mentioned the list of projects and next actions, and the answer to, there's a quick question, how often can I ask for updates? As often as you want. That's the great thing. Every day, if that makes sense. A couple times a day if you're under deadline or externally. And if a projected deadline changes by the role holder, does she or he have the obligation to announce that change if asked? You know, if I've given you a projection of Friday for something, Brian, and I know that it's going to take longer, maybe I'll let you know if I know you're waiting for me, but otherwise I'll just keep going and know that
there's no obligation to, right?
Right.
You can if you want to, and I'm not going to judge you if you don't. There's no cultural expectation that you should, and that's really important, right? It is on me if I want updates to ask for updates.
Yeah.
Can we speak to this first question in the Q&A?
I find GTD very good.
I find GTD very good. I have it in place and I do it, but I find it long to really be able to do it all the time, right? So yeah, so if you're finding that doing GTD is taking time, there's a tax on your productivity, it's a sure sign that there's something off in your overall practice, or just something you're not quite there yet. What I hear and experience myself and hear from all people that are really long-term GTD practitioners, there's no sense of this taking time at all. This doesn't take me any time. It's the opposite. It's the only reason I have as much time free. Mm-hmm. GTD is really, in some ways, it's not even about time. It's about attention. GTD is about managing your attention, which is the thing you can control. Time marches on no matter what, but you can control moment to moment where you place your attention.
Right.
And if you place your attention wisely, right, you waste less of it. You can get more done with the same amount of attention or what have you. So for me, I don't have any sense that GTD takes any time at all. In fact, if anything, it's the only reason I feel like I have as much free time or open time as I do. I
find that my GTD practice is what saves me time.
Yeah.
So absolutely. While there is, I mean, it would be unfair to say you spend seconds and minutes practicing GTD, and to be fair, you've been a practitioner for over a decade.
Oh yeah.
But even if you're getting started, it will take some time to write down those actions and projects, but the time you're buying yourself by being present and focused, because you're not jumbled in your head with all the things you're supposed to remember, is where the net benefit is. There's a question: how do I record actions for I need to figure out what the next action for this project is?
Yeah. So I would ask myself, what does it look like? Well, like, what physical action would I do for that? And there's different answers. Sometimes for me, it's what I need to do is write some notes. I just need to do a brain dump and write some notes. Sometimes it's I need to call Rebecca and talk it out, because I just need somebody to bounce it off of. And then my next action is call Rebecca to strategize on this. Right. Sometimes I need to reflect, in which case my next action is literally sit quietly and reflect, like think. Right. But I do that question for myself. What does it actually look like to move this forward? What physically would I do?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about due dates and deadlines? Due dates and deadlines are a huge topic. You have a wonderful webinar on the challenge of what by when and how deadlines work specifically within Holacracy. But do you want to address this maybe as our last question of?
Yeah, well, I won't get more into the overall, like, how does Holacracy deal with this? We have other content around that, and some of our online courses go into that more. But in terms of just how I use my own GTD practice and OmniFocus, no, I intentionally don't use due dates when I avoid them like the plague. Now I might, in the notes of something, say, put some context, like my scuba trip is on June 11th or whatever. So, that is going to factor in. It's not that I ignore deadlines, right? That does factor in when I need to book a flight and I need to, like,
right. It would be a shame to have the boat leaving knowing that you hadn't booked a flight yet.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's information for me, but I don't use the due date field in my task manager for that as much. I do use it in one context, and I don't want to go into that in depth right now. We do a deeper dive in this in our in-person Holacracy trainings. So for anyone who's thinking about those, we do go deeper into that, and we connect it into the overall team practice for how you manage deadlines on a team. But we'll leave that as a teaser for that, since it's a longer answer.
Yep. I think maybe time for one more question, and then I think we're going to have to call it. There was a question that made it into the chat. And I think this is interesting. How do you deal with inner conflicts because of yours or others' value system? Do you write them on your project and your action list?
So what I do is just figure out what is the outcome I want, right? And sometimes I had an outcome for a while: relationship with somebody healed, right? That was the outcome I wanted. I've had outcomes like I feel secure in a relationship. I had this with my current partner was new, and there was like I was feeling all this interesting insecurity in different ways based on our habits, and we were long distance for a while, and so I had a project on my list, feeling secure in the relationship, right? So I totally do that. When I notice that what I want as an outcome is an inner feeling or a conflict resolved, I just get clear, what's the feeling I want? Right? Or what's the outcome I want in a relationship or whatever? And I capture that as an outcome. And then from there, I ask, what's my next action to get there? And there's different activities that I might capture as a next action. And I love this. I can organize my entire world this way.
That's what I was hoping you would get to. This isn't just for work. It's for life.
Yeah. And then I don't have to, stress out, like just feeling like, I want something to be different in this relationship. I can organize it. It's liberating to like actually capture it as an outcome and then ask myself, what action would I take to get there? And that has really helped my relationships many times,
Yep. No, this is great. I think we're just about at time. We'll have to save the other questions. I'm sure we'll do something like this again. And if you're looking to dive deeper, David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, is a great place to start. And as Brian mentioned,
they also have trainings.
Oh, they have great
trainings.
They have licensees all over the world. They do virtual trainings too. And good luck, everyone, separating those actions and projects. And contact us if you have more questions. And Brian, anything else from you? Thanks so much for taking the time.
No, that's great. Thank you. And obviously, if you're not already deeply familiar with Holacracy, it adds a layer on top of GTD. So if this resonates, Holacracy is going to add even more, and you can find out a lot more about that on our website. And yeah, thanks. It's been fun. We don't sell GTD services. It's all David Allen. We just love it.
Yep.
And,
all right.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time.
Cool. Bye.